Welcome to the second episode of 2021 Vision. My name is Nima.
And my name is Selena. Here on 2021 Vision, we aim to provide you with the insight from trusted caregivers all around the nation. 2020 has motivated us to inspire you to appreciate the present, challenge you to cultivate your future, and motivate you to make a difference in the healthcare world.
On this episode, we are joined by Dr. Margaret Liu. Dr. Liu graduated from Harvard Medical School. She's a physician and researcher studying gene expression, immune responses, and vaccines. From 2015 to 2017, Dr. Liu served as president of the International Society of Vaccines. She is a founder of the field of DNA-based vaccines and studies both plasmid DNA and mRNA vaccine technologies. She was the first researcher to provide evidence that gene-based immunization could protect against infectious diseases such as influenza, tuberculosis, HPV, and HIV. In addition to her work with the animal models, she was involved with the first trial of a gene-based influenza vaccine in humans, and in 2002, Discover magazine recognized Dr. Liu as one of the 50 most important women in science.
Dr. Randall Hyer has over 3 decades of experience in medicine and public health in both the public and private sectors. After graduating with distinction from the U.S. Naval Academy, he studied at Duke Medical School and earned a PhD in molecular biology from Oxford University. Dr. Hyer served 4 years at the World Health Organization as a medical officer responding to outbreaks and emergencies, including anthrax, Ebola, and SARS. Currently, Dr. Hyer is the Senior Vice President of Global Medical Affairs at Moderna.
And finally joining us is Dr. Scott Rivkees. Dr. Scott Rivkees is a graduate of Rutgers University and the University of Medicine and Dentistry of New Jersey. He received residency, fellowship, and postdoctoral training and served as faculty at Massachusetts General Hospital and Harvard Medical School. During his career, Dr. Rivkees has been named as one of America's best doctors, one of America's top pediatricians, and one of New York's best doctors. Before he started his journey as Florida's Surgeon General, Dr. Rivkees served as chair of the Department of Pediatrics at the University of Florida College of Medicine and physician-in-chief of UF Health Shands Children's Hospital. Dr. Rivkees currently serving as a Surgeon General for the state of Florida, and he's focused on protecting, promoting, and improving the health of everyone who calls Florida home. I want to start off to ask you, if you had a patient sitting in front of you right now, how would you explain the importance of vaccine-acquired immunity versus natural immunity?
Well, that's a really good question because, in fact, disease-acquired immunity for a long time was thought to be kind of the gold standard. People got measles and then they would essentially have protection for life. So the question is, why would you instead get a vaccine? But I think there's 2 big reasons. The first is that natural infection, of course, can result in some terrible, terrible outcomes. People can die, whether it's from COVID or whether it's from measles, influenza, I mean, you name it. The outcomes can be death, even for young, healthy people. The other outcomes, though, also can be terrible. So people may survive, but they may end up with either long-term disability from the disease or something that's happened with COVID that in fact just was in the news yesterday is that they're finding that a fair proportion of people who've had COVID end up with immune responses that not only probably help them get over the COVID, but then they get immune responses that attack other organs. And so they think that this is why some people are having these really long-term devastating effects. So this is basically an autoimmune response because the coronavirus infects many, many organs, and therefore you get these immune responses that then somehow end up attacking the person's own organs. So the main reason you'd rather have a vaccine is the vaccine immune response is targeted just against the one part of the virus. It's not targeted against all the other organs that may get infected if you get infection. So I think that that's probably, in a nutshell, the most important reason. The second reason, though, is that not everyone who gets COVID actually develops an immune response. It's kind of something that's been a surprise. But whereas people who get the vaccines, in fact, have a very high level of developing immune response. So those are the two things. The infection itself is dangerous, and then not everyone, if you get the infection, ends up with an immune response. So you still would need the vaccine anyway.
Yeah, this is a really important question. First, we need to really recognize that natural immunity comes with a cost. Where it's true that this vaccine is really harsh on people who are older with underlying medical conditions, there's no question this vaccine has taken a toll on people of all ages. Nationally, there are more than 500,000 Americans who've died of COVID-19. We've lost more than 30,000 people in Florida. And individuals who've had COVID-19 who survive, it now looks like up to 20% may have lingering side effects. So all these things really are preventable. We can really reduce our risk of COVID and its complications through vaccines which have been approved by the Food and Drug Administration for emergency use authorization. Also, there is evidence that one actually has greater immunity against getting COVID if you have the vaccine than if you had COVID itself. So this is why the Center for Disease Control and Prevention also recommends that if somebody has had COVID, that they also get vaccinated against COVID-19. There have been thousands of individuals who've had COVID, who've been vaccinated. No problems have been apparent with that. So the message is, if you've had COVID, get vaccinated. And if you haven't had COVID, get vaccinated as well, because you certainly don't want to get this virus.
I think it's a question of risk. We know what the risk of COVID-19 is, and we know that though many cases are mild, not all cases are mild, and some have severe outcomes, including death. And there are risk factors for that, but they're not universal, and they're not always predictive. So the risk of the disease is what it is. Vaccination, we've received an authorization from the US FDA for the vaccine to be used for emergency use, okay? And we also know that the safety profile of the vaccine in the clinical studies, as the FDA has published in the fact sheet. And I think for an individual who asked me about this, I would say it's a question between you and your healthcare provider as to whether the benefits of vaccination outweigh the risks of COVID-19.
When speaking about vaccines, I think one thing that comes to light all the time is the word side effects. That's what scares everyone, especially with the COVID vaccine now. Can you speak on what those side effects mean when they come about, and the fact that are they normal, are they not normal? Do we see that with all vaccines?
That is a really important question. So, with a vaccine, you're trying to stimulate your immune system. You're trying to wake it up. And so most of the side effects that people think about are because you've now got your immune system revved up, which is a good thing. So your arm might be sore where you get injected. Some people get fevers and chills, but that's actually a good sign that your immune system is responding. So although people think this is uncomfortable or this is bad, it's actually a signal that the vaccine is activating your immune system. Some people have been concerned about the allergic or anaphylactic reactions that have occurred in a very, very small number of people. And in fact, the CDC just released the latest data that it's actually lower. It's only about half the rate than was initially assumed. Now, of course, many people have allergic reactions to many things, whether it's peanuts or eggs or shellfish. And it turns out the incidence of side effects from vaccines is actually quite low. It's about 1 in a million people. And those are just events that happen. It doesn't mean that the person got seriously ill. It just means that they had something like this allergic reaction, but that could be treated or that goes away. So that's what I'd say, is that the disease itself, again, it's all about risk-benefit ratio. And so here we have this pandemic, the risks to people are actually quite huge, and not just to yourself, but then you pass it on to people you love and other people whom you don't even know. So that's actually, I think, would be the biggest thing I'd say is it's all about risk benefit. And in this case, the risk is so great of the disease, and the risk from the vaccine are actually very small.
Yeah, so first of all, vaccines have been proven to prevent disease, the complications, disease, and death from disease for more than a couple hundred years. Millions, hundreds of millions of people have been protected against vaccine. My background's in pediatrics, and one of the most remarkable things about pediatric medicine is the way that we can prevent illness with these vaccines. Typically, their vaccines come in different types of forms. Some people will have reactions to them, most commonly some pain, tenderness at the injection site, but these are really quite mild. Side effects are things that are monitored for all vaccines by the Food and Drug Administration, and this is something that is constantly updated, and so they provide additional guidance. So the public really can feel confidence if a vaccine is out there that its safety has been evaluated.
So we're all aware of the controversy right now between, getting vaccinated, not getting vaccinated, and it's definitely a huge topic during this time. Why do you think getting vaccinated is such a concern to the public, and how do we as healthcare professionals help alleviate some of that concern?
Wow, that is actually comes down to the really key role for healthcare professionals of how do you communicate and take into account people's concerns and yet educate them, but then allow them to make their own decisions, but with the right information. So I think there's several factors. One is that there's a lot of disinformation that has gotten spread around for whatever reason. And I think that a second reason people have concerns about the vaccines is that they are concerned that the vaccines were developed so quickly. And what isn't obvious to people is that all these technologies, even the mRNA vaccines that are the newest technologies, have actually been worked on for decades. And so it looks like it's a brand new vaccine. It looks like it was rushed, but in fact, it's dependent on a lot of work that's gone before. I like to explain it as sort of like if you already know how to make ice cream and then you decide you want to make a new flavor, or maybe you even have a slightly different recipe for your ice cream. But it's not like you're starting from scratch and having to figure out how do you turn this liquid cream into something that's, tasty and frozen. So even the mRNA vaccines were built upon a lot of research for prior generations like DNA vaccines, but also even on mRNA vaccines. So I think that that's one thing that people, if they understood that, and if they also knew that the reason it was so fast was partly that the governments and the companies themselves took a financial risk, and that's what shortened the time. So for example, usually you wait until you get the results of your clinical trials before you start manufacturing, because you don't want to manufacture all these vaccines and then have them sit around and not be of use. In this case, the companies actually started manufacturing before they knew the results. And so that the minute the results came out and they got authorization, they could start pretty much right away immunizing. So that shortened the process, but it didn't mean that the safety studies were any less. It just meant that they took a financial risk. And so people, if they understand what's behind the fast speed and the shortening of the timelines and all of the work that's gone on, I think people will feel more comfortable with the safety. And then again, it's risk benefit. If they understand just how devastating this disease is, they'll also understand why it's so important to get immunized.
Yeah, again, a really important question. So we have never had vaccines been developed so rapidly before. And like all new therapeutics that come on, this can lead the public to have hesitancy, not have as much confidence. But having these vaccines developed in such a short period of time, this is a good thing. These new vaccines, new technology, they build upon decades of basic science research, and they really do provide us the pathway out of this really awful pandemic. We as health professionals, we have the expertise. We have the special trust of our patients. We know the medical literature. We know the process that these vaccines have gone through. So this is a situation that we have where we have a very special role in providing healthcare, a role that we should all embrace to let the public know the process by which these have come about, showing them that we roll up our sleeves as well, and that we have confidence in these vaccines.
Sure. I think it'd be hard for me to speculate about what the individual might or might not be thinking. I think just generally speaking, there's always a question of education. I think the two vaccines in the United States that have been made available for authorized use by the FDA are based on new vaccine technology, new platform, and there's always questions about that. Natural questions. I'd have them too. And I think it's a question of educating people, informing them what it is so they understand. And most people get their information about immunization from their trusted healthcare provider. So my advice would be for people seeking advice for their personal situation to consult their doctor, talk to their healthcare provider, ask him or her about the vaccine, and that's where they should get their information. And they should go out to educate themselves so that they're aware of the benefits and the risks of vaccination and the risk, of course, of acquiring COVID-19. So I should emphasize that even with vaccination, we still need to maintain the recommended public health measures of safe distance, wearing masks, and washing our hands.
With that being said, why aren't all vaccines 100% effective, and how would you explain that safety to a patient?
So, we're all different. And so some people get some diseases more seriously than other diseases. Some people's immune systems are very active. Some people's immune systems are immunocompromised somewhat for whatever reason, genetically, or maybe they're older, or maybe they've had chemotherapy. So there's no vaccine that can be 100% effective. What I'm astounded by is that these vaccines have been so efficacious, because some vaccines, like the influenza vaccine, are 30 to 50% effective. Others, like the measles, are in the 90s. But that was always like a pretty special vaccine. So it's actually been fantastic that these are the two that are used in the United States so far are 94, 95% effective. But nothing is 100% because we're all different and we all respond slightly differently to whatever it is, whether it's a vaccine or whether it's a disease.
Yeah, so first of all, with these vaccines that we have out there now, we have 3 vaccines, one by Pfizer, one by Moderna, one by Johnson & Johnson. Each of these has been showed almost to universally protect against severe disease, protect against hospitalization, protect against death. Why is it not 100%? We are complicated creatures, us humans. We have a lot of variability from person to person in terms of how our immune systems work. But the bottom line is this: these vaccines have been shown to be very, very effective in terms of preventing against COVID-19. And compared to other vaccines that have been developed in the past, such as the flu shot, these really are terrific in terms of the degree of protection they confer.
The 2 vaccines out that you said in the United States, the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine, could you touch a little bit on the difference between the 2?
Well, they both use the same fundamental technology, which is mRNA. So mRNA, of course, is the intermediate step between DNA, which gets transcribed into mRNA. And mRNA is kind of like if you had a computer code, and then you need to turn computer code into words or instructions, because it basically is the code for then making a protein. So they both use the same fundamental technology. of delivering you the mRNA that then your body makes the coronavirus antigen against which you make an immune response. They're slightly different in terms of the way they're constructed. Now, mRNA is very, very unstable. It gets degraded right away, which is one reason actually why people don't really need to worry about it from a safety standpoint, because once it's in your body, it gets broken down quickly. And in fact, in order to protect it enough to get into your cells to at least make the vaccine, they have to coat it in a lipid nanoparticle. So here's another, you can tell I have a sweet tooth. My explanation for this is it's like an M&M. So chocolate melts really easily. If you were carrying it around in your hand, you'd end up with chocolate all over your hand. You put a candy coating around it, and now the chocolate doesn't melt in your hand. So this lipid nanoparticle basically goes around and protects the mRNA. So the two vaccines are slightly different, but it's the same concept for both of them.
We have different vaccines that are available. We still have vaccines in short supply, and people should be able to, people ask, which vaccine should I get? My answer is get the vaccine which is available.
You spoke on technology and how, this, although this has been in our viewpoint, it happened like overnight. This is over the years of experience, research, why we were able to make it happen so fast. So do you think we have the technology to be able to come up with a vaccine for like a disease like HIV? Because a lot of people are looking at it like, we were able to come up with a vaccine so fast for COVID. Why can't we make a vaccine for HIV? Is it the finances that are holding it back? Is it the politics that's holding it back from us being able to create vaccines for these other diseases?
Wow, that's like the holy grail of the immunologist to answer that question. In a sense, your answer is all of the above, but it turns out that some diseases are just harder to make vaccines against. So, in fact, the whole reason that my group got involved in DNA vaccines when we first pioneered the technology was that different vaccines can make different kinds of immune responses. They can make antibodies and they can make T cell responses. And some technologies are better for making T cell responses. So it turns out that a disease like COVID, that it appears that antibodies alone can neutralize and kill the virus, and that's great. Diseases like HIV are actually harder. And the reason is that the HIV actually gets into cells and then actually integrates, becomes part of that cell. And so you do need probably, in addition to antibodies, to having these T cells. And so this has actually been, this is why I call it the Holy Grail, is that we and many, many other people, we're trying to find ways to develop the right kinds of immunity that could target something like HIV and malaria and tuberculosis and cancer, which may need more immune responses and different types than are what appear to be all that's needed for something like COVID, for SARS coronavirus.
Yeah, so first of all, a lot of this has to do with the basic biology of the virus and how these viruses can change. So there have been a number of viruses that are out there where we, the medical community, have tried to develop vaccines. HIV is a good example. Respiratory syncytial virus, which affects so many children, is another example. And there's certain things about viruses, how they change, which make this challenging in some situations. Fortunately, with this COVID-19 and these coronaviruses, their structure is such that it really makes them amenable to vaccinations that are effective. And as mentioned earlier, it's really terrific. Here we are a year into this pandemic, and we have 3 vaccines which are available, millions of Americans getting vaccinated so far, and other vaccines on the doorstep quite soon.
Well, I think with the SARS-CoV-2 virus, there's a couple things that give us a big step up. One is that it's very similar to SARS-1. So we already had kind of a database. We were able to find it quickly too. That was a big part of it in getting to a vaccine. Second is the development of the messenger RNA platform for vaccines is a step change, is a big change in technology that has opened up many doors.
Mhm.
And Moderna, we're definitely pursuing many other diseases with this technology because I think the technology is a game changer. And so I think, for other diseases, whether it's HIV or something else, those were this technology wasn't available at that time. And I think part of the reason that that I think the technology is a big enabler. It really is.
What is your
Sure.
message to the people that are on the fence of getting the vaccine? And what is your message to the healthcare professionals that don't believe in the vaccine? And why do you think that the healthcare professionals that have the education, have the background on what an mRNA a vaccine is, why they're not believing in it?
Well, I think that there are a couple of answers to your question. The first is that I think many of the healthcare professionals have been so busy that they haven't had time to actually themselves look into the literature, the careful literature of exactly what has gone into these vaccines, what's the scientific basis, and how much research has been done. I think sometimes a little knowledge is a dangerous thing too, that people kind of think of, oh, I heard of this person having that, and so and so said this might happen, and they happen to be a scientist. And so I think that's another reason. The other thing, though, is that does surprise me a little bit, is that so maybe because healthcare workers have been among the first people to both participate in the trials, because many of them were in the clinical trials, but also some of them are getting immunized first. So there may have been incidences of, for example, this anaphylaxis, even though it's just a very small number of people. And but they may have heard about it, and so to them that becomes a bigger issue. So let me put it in another way. If you've just been on a plane and you hear about a plane crash, you all of a sudden worry more about plane crashes, even though there are many more people who die every year from car accidents. But that's just kind of part of our our everyday life. So I think that some of it is just that people focus on different aspects. So, for example, a healthcare worker is at greater risk of getting COVID than somebody who, like me, can work from their home office. But they have to develop a mentality of every day going into work and hoping that the PPE, the protective equipment, is protecting them, and so on. And so they get used to that risk, and then they have to be more comfortable with that risk. And yet they may not then recognize that actually the vaccine really is not risky. There have been these few cases, but people can get treated for anaphylaxis, and it still is a very small number of cases. It's 5 people with the Pfizer vaccine out of 1 million. So it's very unlikely that they're going to be one of those 5 people out of 1 million to have that. So I think that the other way I like to think of is, what if you drove without a seatbelt? None of us would do that. And so a vaccine's kind of like your seatbelt, it's your protection. And you have to understand what the risks are, especially with these new strains coming along, where you want to have as high an antibody against the SARS coronavirus as you can.
Yeah, we need to recognize that this vaccine, this is our path forward out of this brutal pandemic. We're dealing with the worst pandemic in 100 years affecting the world. COVID-19 remains a very, very harsh virus. The effects on all of us are well known. Vaccines have saved the lives of hundreds of millions of individuals over the past decades, and they will continue to do so. So what we need to do is this. We really need to balance the advantage of doing things for the greater good, things that also protect ourselves versus not doing so. This is a personal choice we all have to make. But we need to realize that when you get COVID-19 vaccination, not only do you protect yourself, but you're protecting those around you. In terms of individuals who want to know about the track record, worldwide, nearly 500 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines have been given. That's 500 million. In the States, more than 125 million doses have been given. And in Florida, as of this morning, I'm really proud that we've administered 8 million doses to more than 5.5 million Floridians. These vaccines have been shown to be effective. They have been shown to be quite safe. So if you are afraid, if you're on the fence, let's have a conversation about why this is. We also need to know that where we get our information from. Remember that the FDA and the CDC are the authoritative sources when it comes to information about vaccine. And please refer to this. There are all kinds of false information out there about these vaccines, and based upon the information that the CDC has out there. And again, the track record for 500 million doses show that these vaccines are effective and that they are quite safe.
When the first vaccine was developed, smallpox, the vaccinia against smallpox, almost immediately people didn't trust it. So vaccine hesitancy has been with us from day one. So my response would be sort of thinking, what is it about the vaccine that elicits that response in us? And we could speculate as to what that is, but I do think part of that is it is unfamiliar. We can't see the microbe or whatever's causing the disease. And in many cases, we no longer see the disease anymore because the vaccine's been so effective, right? And so people's memory is based on what they've seen, what they hear about. Smallpox was different because you could see it. It was very common. It had a high case fatality rate. I think COVID-19 is interesting in sense that it's rather common. It's certainly in the news. I would say there's 100% awareness or virtually of COVID-19. It still doesn't explain vaccine hesitancy, but I just believe that it's related to, it's hard, things that you can't see that can hurt you are really scary.
Yeah.
Just by nature. And I think, the vaccine, it becomes part of that, and it contributes to generalized anxiety about it, which I can understand.
You spoke a little bit about knowing too little can be dangerous. I think that also a lot of people are just programmed to think this way. They don't like being told no, and they also don't like doing what people tell them to do, right? So how would you find that fine line between telling a patient something about a vaccine?
Yeah, so this is a key issue that gets at some of the fundamental aspects of human psychology. So on the one hand, all of us value our independent thought, and so we want to make our own decisions. At the same time, we don't actually know everything about any particular field. So we have to take our car to the car mechanic, and there are a few people who would understand everything, but the rest of it, you have to trust the expertise of the person. So I guess part of my response to your question would be that you always have to consider the sources. So it's okay if somebody wants to be skeptical, whether it's about vaccines or whether it's wearing masks. But when you make your own decision, you have to be careful of the quality of what you're looking at. So it's not enough to say, oh, I got this email from my friend who, it says that this person is a professor at this fabulous institution and has worked in the area for 30 years, and he or she says this. Well, it turns out you don't know if that person is really the person who wrote it or who said it, or if any of that is true. So you have to go to sources that are unbiased and that are actually fact-based and scientific. And I think that that's really is what gets at the bottom of it. And then you need to explain to people, like, I'm not forcing you what to do. but here are a set of trusted facts, and therefore you can help make your own opinion. I will tell you that it's interesting, you know, the flu vaccine, for example, every year there's often really poor uptake and usage.
Yeah.
And one year there was a shortage because one of the big manufacturers had a problem. And that year, everybody wanted a vaccine. So we have competing issues. We have what's called FOMO, fear of missing out. So when something's valuable and in short supply, everybody wants it. When it's there and it's just around, then people actually aren't as interested in it. We actually had a woman in my town who died the year of the flu shortage because people lined up for hours before the sun came up to get the few doses. And she got so hot that even though this was in a parking lot at a grocery store pharmacy, she got so hot that even though the grocery store came out and gave water bottles to people waiting in line, she passed out, hit her head on a fire hydrant, and died because she was waiting for her flu vaccine. And yet the year before, nobody wanted the flu shot. So this human psychology is very complex. You know, there's a thing called confirmation bias where people pay more attention to things they read that confirm what they already thought. So I think that we just need to urge people to be very vigilant about their sources and also to examine their own biases and say, okay, if this solid piece of evidence is against what I believe, then I need to really think about that and re-examine my own bias rather than just discarding something that I find inconvenient.
Yeah, you know, those as healthcare practitioners, this is something we deal with all the day, all the time. And one of the important models of medicine right now is shared decision making and presenting patients with what the options are and what the risks are, and helping that individual make the most informed decision that they can. And part of this can be providing current literature about this. Also, the CDC has developed a whole bunch of different fact sheets about this, as has the FDA. So, yeah, again, for those of us who are in the field of medicine, we really try to make sure that our patients, those we really care about, have the information that they need to make the best decision possible, and respect that.
Over the years, how has your viewpoint on vaccines changed from let's just say, even going back to when you were a young kid until now? How has your viewpoint changed on vaccination? Has it always been the same, or has it changed over the years?
Interesting question. So, I'm actually got into the field of vaccines because of my interest in immunology, not because of an interest in vaccines. In fact, my initial work really was in cancer, trying to stimulate the immune response to fight cancer. But because it's those same T cells that we talked about as playing potentially a role for certain diseases and maybe not being as important for other diseases, that's what led me into it. But I will tell you, and this gives away my age, so I say this with a little hesitation, but I remember as a kid standing in line as a kid, a really little kid, and getting a sugar cube with the polio vaccine on it. And, I don't remember a lot from being that age, but it was really a big deal back then, polio, because in fact, that one a lot of kids got, as opposed to this one people ignore because, it's mostly older people who get it. But this one was, kids were dying. They were on iron lungs, which if you've ever seen them, it's, your whole body's in this tube, and they would end up paralyzed off it. Or with limps or whatever. So it was a really scary time in the 50s. And then the vaccine came and it just transformed things, except that now people have forgotten how scary the diseases are and that those diseases still can affect people. That's what people forget. They just think, oh, it'll never happen to me or my kid. Any rate, so it was really my interest in immunology. But then it became clear that vaccines are a way, they're probably the most transformative medical intervention, because here we've eliminated smallpox from the entire planet. And actually, we've also eliminated something called rinderpest from cattle. And so 2 diseases have been eliminated from the planet. Polio actually probably could have been eliminated by now, except for, problems because people were skeptical about the vaccine. So some countries don't have, very much, as much immunization as they should. Measles could ultimately be eliminated. So, vaccines just have this incredible potential for transforming the global health of everyone.
That's a really interesting question. So I remember, when I was a young boy, my mother talking about how they would fear summer and seeing kids crippled from polio. And I still, some people, who have the side effects of polio. So that's something which can be prevented now. I remember when I was a medical resident, the first patient I took care of as an intern out of medical school was a boy who ended up having encephalitis after chickenpox. We now have a chickenpox vaccine, so that is preventable. When I was a resident, I used to take care of infants, children, who ended up having meningitis from Haemophilus influenza, children who ended up devastated, children that I saw die, children that survived that had long-term problems. And now, if you talk to medical trainees, they don't see this anymore. So over the course of my career, I've seen the evolution in terms of vaccines, how they can prevent really such horrible, devastating diseases.
Based on your experiences and everyone's experiences in the year 2020, what would be your vision for 2021?
What would be my
What's your
prediction?
vision?
My vision, okay.
Where do you think healthcare is going and where should it be going?
Well, I can tell you one thing where I think it should be going, and that is that I hope that what we bring fundamentally to everything we do, whether we're healthcare workers or whether we are first responders or whether we're somebody, teacher or anything, is that we bring a care for our fellow human beings. And by that, I mean that there's a lot that each of us can do, whether or not we're healthcare professionals, to stop and decrease the pandemic. And that involves thinking about other people, not just ourselves. So it's not just, do I get the vaccine or can I live in my little isolated hermit cave and, not worry about myself? But it means, that I need to wear a mask so that I don't transmit to other people. It means that we need to think about providing vaccines for the poor people and the marginalized people, the lowly paid workers in our society who are at very great risk because of what they do, whether they're farm workers or grocery workers or whatever. And we need to think about people in the rest of the world who can't afford to have a vaccine that needs to be refrigerated at minus 70 degrees Celsius. So that would actually be my vision for 2021, which may sound kind of idealistic, but I think people are at heart, they're good. And so I would just hope we can pull together and help out those less fortunate than we are. And that has an impact on everything, whether it's vaccine distribution, whether it's prevention by social distancing, et cetera. So that's my dream. And I would hope that if we all do that, actually, then we can actually make the pandemic end sooner. It's very impressive what happened with the polio vaccine, because what was interesting was the incidence of polio started plummeting before the vaccine was developed. It went completely down after the vaccine came, but what it means is that it's the combination, but that these low-tech interventions, social distancing, mask wearing in our case, are a huge part, as well as then we have these powerful technologies that are great for being interventions.
COVID-19 vaccinations will get us back to normal. COVID-19 has taken a toll on all of us in, so many different ways. There can be personal loss of family members who succumb to this virus. All of us know individuals who've been sickened with this virus, who have lingering side effects. Look at the lifestyle changes that we have endured over this past year. Children out of school, not being able to visit our loved ones in nursing homes, the way we shop, the very way that we socialize. The medical toll of COVID-19 is not to be underestimated. I mean, there have been 500 million Americans who succumbed to this virus and many, many more who've been hospitalized. So, now that we have these vaccines that are available and we're going to have continued availability of these vaccines, this really gives us the path forward out of this brutal pandemic, and to be able to have vaccines available within a year of when this was declared a pandemic is really incredible. These vaccines not only protect us, but they also slow the spread of things. So my vision is that we collectively roll up our sleeves and that we protect ourselves, and in protecting ourselves, we actually protect others. And when this happens, this is how we will get back to the normal lifestyle that we all embrace. This is something that we really need to do.
And that concludes the end of episode 2. We would like to thank Dr. Liu, Dr. Hyer, and Dr. Rivkees for taking the time to join us today, and we thank everyone for tuning in. Make sure to follow us on our social media at 2021Vision and visit our website, 2021vision.com. Until next time, my name is Selena.
My name is Nima.
And we encourage you to think about your 2021 vision.